Do you have a minute for a story? I love a good story. I have to tell you about how Realm of Caring started and our genesis and where that came from and why Realm of Caring is so important to the community. My son Zaki has a rare catastrophic form of early childhood epilepsy, and his seizures started when he was only 4 months old. By the time he was 9, he was receiving hospice, and he'd been through 17 pharmaceuticals. So we did everything the doctor said to do, and a lot of things the doctor didn't say to do. Every alternative therapy you could imagine, we experimented with. You know, we saw a chiropractor and an acupuncturist and all kinds of supplements and many alternative doctors, an iridologist. They'd look at the iris, and it was, it was sort of crazy times, but you would have done anything, to save your child. You would do the same thing. And so Realm of Caring was born from and with families who were in extremely desperate situations just like mine. So as I mentioned, we did transition to hospice the year previous. And it was my hospice counselor who asked me if I had thought about medical cannabis for my son. Well, man, I'm a byproduct of the 80s. And so this is your brain on drugs. And, I thought I knew about the cannabis plant. And it turns out everything that I had learned wasn't exactly right. I did pride myself on being an avid researcher. I looked up a lot of different drugs and mechanisms of action and Zaki's specific syndrome and his specific seizure types. And I really hadn't heard about cannabis for seizures until my hospice counselor mentioned it. And then I got to digging. And I did find some early research with really, really small groups of people that showed pretty positive results. And as you can imagine, that was light at the end of a very, very dark tunnel for us. So it was a single act of bravery of Miss Kate, our hospice counselor, giving me some phone numbers. And she could have lost her job, which is what she prefaced the conversation with. She's like, hey, look, I am not recommending this. Here's some phone numbers. And I know another family very similar to yours, and I just would never forgive myself if I didn't share this information with you. And on the piece of paper were 3 phone numbers. Lab that tests cannabis, Paige Figgy, Charlotte's mom, and Joel Stanley, the creator of Charlotte's Web. I basically had to beg Joel to get started because he had exactly one other family, that he was helping. And, she was actually doing really well. I didn't know that. I didn't talk to Paige early on. I wanted to make sure of the science, and then I wanted to make sure that we could get a product. And so it was July 19th, 2012, and Zaki took his first dose of what they now call Charlotte's Web. Back then, it was literally CBD, cannabidiol, in a syringe with honey. I couldn't believe what I was doing, even though, inside I had done my research and I knew that this was safe. I knew the lethal dose rating. I knew these things. It still felt really, I guess, just because of the baggage, that the plant comes with. It still felt really weird. In fact, it's the only thing that I ever checked in with my mom on. 17 pharmaceuticals, all these different treatments. And when I decided I was going to use this, I called my mom. I didn't call my mom about anything in the decade previous. So what do you think about Depakote or this drug or that drug or Felbitol, our 4th drug, a black box warning label when the FDA basically makes you sign a release because a known side effect from this drug is death. I mean, that's where we were at, if you can imagine that. So we pick it up, we go back to the house, it's late, make the makeshift bed on the floor in our bedroom, which is what we were dealing with at that time due to Zaki's seizures, and really early morning seizures in which he would stop breathing. And that's really why he transitioned to hospice. I mean, he had dealt with hundreds of seizures every day pretty much his entire life. But in the late stages of his disease course, he became extremely intractable. and emergency medications would not stop these seizures in which he would stop breathing. And so you had to wait it out. I would hold him, and his, lips are blue and his fingertips look like they've been dipped in blueberries, and that's pretty much where we were. And this is where the story takes a turn, so hang on. So we do give Zaki, his CBD, and he doesn't have a seizure for 48 hours. And so this child is used to having dozens and hundreds of seizures every single day. And so I really couldn't believe it. We were introduced to this plant, which I wish was something different. Cannabis, and even still to a certain extent hemp now, it comes with a lot of baggage, and people think they know a lot of things about this plant, and there's a lot of misunderstanding and propaganda and misinformation around it. And I do sure wish it was dandelion root or echinacea or something, that doesn't come with that sort of baggage, but it wasn't. It was this. And so that became my plight and many, many other families' plight. And so after a decade of having that many seizures and all of a sudden them remitting, I still have not touched the ground. We're a couple months away from being 7 years into this journey, and we're winning, and we're helping other families to do the same. So early on, back in 2012, when we got started, after Zaki, seizures remitted. So he had 48 hours of no seizures, and then they came back, and they were certainly less severe, they were less frequent, but his seizures did come back. And I sort of, because of the decade, right, I just kind of thought, something else, some other hype, as opposed to hope. Well, within 3 months, his seizures just completely remitted, and he remained so for the next almost 4 years, which was incredible for us. So when his seizures did remit, I did get in touch with Paige and was asking how Charlotte was doing, and she was doing absolutely fantastic. And it was Paige's single act of bravery, and then Miss Kate's single act of bravery, and then that inspires many others to make a decision that might be a little unorthodox. And that's really how this whole thing started. In the beginning, we operated off of closed private Facebook pages. We were, at that time, we were afraid our children will be taken away. And, and sometimes that did happen. And sometimes today, occasionally that still happens. It's absolutely insane that your zip code dictates whether you can help your loved one. That's still the case in some situations today. Did reach out to our Department of Human Services because, at the time, this wasn't classified as hemp. This is medical marijuana, this is cannabis. And the only thing worse than watching your child seize is not being able to watch him at all. And I was extremely fearful that somehow protective services would get involved and people would misunderstand what it was that we were doing. And so I had that conversation with them, and they said certainly if I went through the process here in Colorado, which was then finding 2 doctors to make a recommendation for Zaki and going through that whole process, which we did successfully, but it was very, very difficult at that time. In fact, Paige never received her state license back then. Like the first time she applied for that, they never sent that to her. And so she was also very nervous to come out in a public way. Well, we got ours. Our neurologist was absolutely fighting for us, and he made the recommendation, and we did get our license, and so we were able to get started. And that did make, between that, having those doctors' recommendations, having that license in my hand, talking to Department of Human Services and understanding that, this is bizarre. It's never been really done before, but I felt protected enough to be able to tell our story And so that's what we did. We still did that in a very kind of underground, quiet way with our community. People who were trying to keep their kids alive, which is our obligation. You know, when you're in a situation of suffering and you're hurting and other people are experiencing that exact same thing, if something works, it doesn't matter what it is, how unorthodox it is, you have to talk about it. And so we did. And so began a movement. And so families would go through that process. If they did not live in Colorado, they'd have to relocate, which is extremely difficult. They had to establish residency. They had to get doctor signatures. They had to assign their plants through the state of Colorado has a system for this, assign their plants to, at that time, the Stanley brothers had a medical cannabis operation. And then with the next harvest, they would get those plants, you know, in the ground, and then you'd have to wait for the next harvest. And this was an extremely difficult, laborsome time for many, many families. And most families couldn't relocate. I mean, if you're in a medically fragile situation, how do you pick up your family and move with your children? How do you leave your support system, you leave your doctor network? I mean, hundreds of families did that. And we had a medical migration, and we had medical refugees in the state of Colorado at that time. You know, we were like legally considered felons in some ways. I've never broken the law in my life. I'm just trying to keep my kid alive, like a single agenda. That's it. No one was trying to be a hero. No one was trying to be revolutionary. That we weren't thinking about that. The only thing that we were thinking about is that our kids are not going to make it, and this is a last shot, and we absolutely have to try. We have to really let the world know that this is an option, and we actually thought this is great. We actually thought we were just going to, we thought, well, what's the best way to do that? What's the best way to sort of tell the world, hey, this is an option, and then we can go on with our life. Like, we've done our duty. You know, we're gonna tell everybody, hey, this works, and then we can just let people then know, and they can figure it out, and we can go on with life. And so we started to assemble some media. We thought that would be the best way. You know, what's a national media platform that we can tell this story from? And especially, it was really, really important to us in a balanced, unbiased way. And so along came Sanjay Gupta and the first weed CNN special. And Sanjay came out, and he was extremely skeptical. In fact, he was anti-medical cannabis, if you look at some of his earlier statements and his positioning around this. And he started to come out and visit with our families in 2013. And so, you know, we were growing. By the end of 2013, we had about 400 families. So he was able to come. He had dinner with our families. We met at Rita's house, and Sanjay was there with video cameras, and we were just going to tell the world what we were experiencing.